you know why a Cambridge coffee pot sold for £3,350 on eBay? Well, because it was the focus of another Cambridge invention. Quentin Stafford Fraser takes us back to 1991, when the Trojan coffee pot proved to be the inspiration for what we now know as the webcam.
So the story of the first webcam is an interesting one, frivolous in some ways, because we were trying to fulfill a very important need in computer science research, which was the need for caffeine intake. There was a group of us in part of the systems group in the old computer laboratory, and we worked mostly in one particular room in the lab called the Trojan room. And we used to get our coffee from a good old-fashioned coffee filter machine. Now, this coffee was never very good, and it only tasted even vaguely drinkable if you got it when it was really fresh. And some of the group didn't work in that same room. Some of them worked 2 or 3 rooms away, maybe 2 or 3 floors away. And so they would often come down to get their mug of coffee and find that, in fact, it was stale or empty, or basically those of us who sat close to it had got there first and drunk all the best stuff. So we felt this was a little bit unfair and was probably hindering the progress of computer science. So we were working on multimedia networks at the time. We were trying to investigate whether you can actually send over a computer network the kind of quality of video that would be required for broadcast transmissions and so on. It wasn't clear at the time that that was the case, but it meant we had lots of odd bits of equipment lying around from these past experiments. And so a friend and I, Paul Jardetsky and I, got one of these cameras that we'd been using for these experiments. This is actually one of the early ones. And we pointed this at the coffee pot. We gripped it in a kind of retort stand, pointed it at the coffee pot, and we wrote some software which ran on one of our special computers, and another little application that people could run on their desktop, which allowed them to see how much coffee there was in the coffee pot, and they could do this even if they worked 2 or 3 floors away. So when you were working away at your computer, you could just glance down and see whether the coffee was full or empty or somewhere in between. And about this time, there was this new thing that was starting to appear called the World Wide Web. And in the early days, the web didn't allow you to display images. It only showed text. You could have headings in different sizes and colors and things like that. But essentially, it was a text-based medium. And in early 1993, when the first web browsers started to be able to display images, we started wondering something that is very obvious now, but wasn't quite so obvious then. And that was this. It was when your web browser goes to the web server and says, please give me this image, what happens if the server doesn't give back the same image every time? And we didn't know whether this would work, but we thought it might be fun to try. And we thought, where have we got a source of constantly changing images? Aha, the coffee pot. And so Daniel Gordon and Martin Johnson modified the software that we had written so that it could output HTTP, essentially. So it looked like a web server. And that meant that you didn't need our special software, you didn't need our special networking stacks, you could just run a web browser and see how much coffee was in our coffee pot. And as a side effect of this, it meant that the whole world could see how much coffee was in our coffee pot. And there weren't very many interesting things out there on the web at the time. I think we're probably still talking about a time when web browsers didn't have bookmark facilities, because frankly, there were so few websites out there that you could remember the addresses of all the ones you wanted to visit. So we, to have something new and something rather quirky on the web was quite fun, particularly since no one had done this before. We built this system, I think, essentially in an afternoon, probably less than an afternoon. And there are some interesting lessons, I guess, you could learn from that. We did a lot of other things. You know, I was working in that lab for a year. This is probably, even I don't remember most of the things I worked on while I was there. So this is, you know, this is the bit that became memorable from all of the stuff we were doing there. And you could even say that the World Wide Web, at least for that very particular application, had displaced a lot of the stuff we were doing, because actually we were building these very sophisticated protocols for sending images at high quality, high resolution, high frame rate, glorious color over the web, over the network, not the web yet, over the network, and actually, the thing that people remember mostly from that room was this little grey image that was just a few pixels square and was updated 3 times a minute, if I remember correctly. But the stuff that we had done before was very important nonetheless, partly because it meant that when a new technology, like the web, came along, we were able to jump on that, and the expertise and to some degree the equipment that we'd built up over time for another project actually enabled us to be the first movers, essentially, when the web came along. And so I think there are some interesting lessons there about not always knowing what research that you do now is going to enable in the future, and sometimes even when research is abandoned, the expertise that you build up enables new research to happen very quickly.
You're probably sitting or standing somewhere in Cambridge watching this on a mobile phone, so we hope these films have inspired you. Collusion would love to see your Cambridge Invents interviews. Maybe you have an invention to share, or you know someone who does. You can use the hashtag Cambridge Invents to share your films with us, and also to tweet us about other Cambridge inventions you'd like us to profile.